The charity golf tournament at Pinehurst Country Club was supposed to be a celebration. Local business leaders, politicians, and community pillars had gathered for the annual fundraiser supporting youth education programs. I'd only agreed to attend because the scholarship foundation I quietly supported was one of the beneficiaries, and they'd specifically requested my presence for the awards ceremony later that evening. I stood near the clubhouse terrace, wearing a simple navy blazer and khakis, watching the foursomes finish their rounds. Most people here knew me only as David Thompson's daughter, the one who disappointed him by choosing academia over the family construction business, the one who'd walked away from a guaranteed executive position to pursue what Dad called theoretical nonsense. Victoria, Mrs. Henderson, the tournament organizer, approached with her usual enthusiastic smile. "I'm so glad you could make it. Your foundation's contribution to the scholarship fund has been incredible." "Thank you, Mrs. Henderson. I believe in investing in young minds. Will you be joining us for dinner? The ceremony is at 8. Before I could answer, Dad's booming laugh carried across the terrace. He was holding court with his usual golf foursome: Bill Morrison, the bank president, Judge Robert Chen, and Dr. Michael Torres, who ran the largest medical practice in town. They were all successful men in their 60s, pillars of the community who'd known each other for decades. I watched Dad gesture animatedly as he told some story, probably about his latest construction project or business deal. At 65, he was still imposing, 6'2" with silver hair and the kind of commanding presence that made people listen when he spoke. Thompson Construction had built half the commercial buildings in town, and Dad never let anyone forget it. "There's my daughter," I heard him say as his group noticed me across the terrace. "Victoria, come over here." I reluctantly approached the group, knowing this wouldn't end well. Dad had a habit of using social gatherings to remind people of what he saw as my failures. "Gentlemen, this is my daughter Victoria," Dad said, his tone already carrying an edge of disappointment. "The one I've told you about." Bill Morrison extended his hand with a polite smile. "Nice to finally meet you, Victoria. Your father talks about you often." "I'm sure he does," I replied diplomatically. Dad took a long sip of his scotch before continuing. "Victoria here had every opportunity handed to her. Full scholarship to Princeton, summa cum laude, accepted to Harvard Business School. Could have run Thompson Construction by now, could have built something real." The familiar knot formed in my stomach. I'd heard this speech countless times over the past 15 years. Instead, Dad continued, his voice growing louder as the alcohol loosened his tongue. "She chose to waste her life playing with equations nobody understands. Theoretical physics, can you imagine? 20 years of studying things that have no practical application whatsoever." Judge Chen shifted uncomfortably. "David, maybe." "No, it's fine," Dad interrupted. "She needs to hear this. Do you know what she does for a living? She works at some research institute in California, making maybe $60,000 a year, studying particles so small they might not even exist. Meanwhile, Thompson Construction does $12 million in revenue annually." My cheeks burned with embarrassment, but I kept my expression neutral. The other men looked increasingly uncomfortable with Dad's public humiliation of his own daughter. "That's my biggest regret," Dad said, pointing directly at me. "Complete waste of potential. All that intelligence, all those opportunities, thrown away to chase fairy tales and win meaningless awards that nobody's ever heard of." Dr. Torres cleared his throat. "David, perhaps we should." "Wait," Bill Morrison interrupted, pulling out his phone with a puzzled expression. "Victoria Thompson. That name sounds familiar. He started typing rapidly. Quantum physics, you said? I felt my heart rate spike. This was exactly what I'd been trying to avoid. Don't bother looking her up, Dad said dismissively. She's published some papers that 12 people in the world might understand. Nothing that matters to real life. Bill's eyes widened as he stared at his phone screen. Wait, isn't this the quantum physicist who just won the Nobel Prize? He looked up at me, then back at his phone. Dr. Victoria Thompson, laureate in physics for groundbreaking work in quantum entanglement applications? Dad's face went white. Nobel Prize. Judge Chen leaned over to look at Bill's phone. This month's announcement? Just 2 weeks ago. Bill read aloud. Dr. Thompson's revolutionary quantum computing breakthrough promises to transform cryptography, medical imaging, and artificial intelligence. David, your daughter won the Nobel Prize in physics. The silence that followed was deafening. Dad's Scotch glass hung suspended halfway to his lips, his face cycling through confusion, disbelief, and something approaching panic. That can't be right, he stammered. Victoria works at some little research lab. She drives a 15-year-old Honda. She lives in a tiny apartment. Dr. Torres had pulled out his own phone and was scrolling rapidly. Stanford Quantum Research Institute. Dr. Victoria Thompson, Director of Quantum Applications. He looked up at me with amazement. You're the director. I nodded slowly, knowing there was no hiding anymore. I've been the director for 8 years. But you said she makes $60,000 a year, Bill said to Dad, who was still staring at me in shock. Her salary alone is listed here as $380,000, Dr. Torres read from his phone, plus research grants totaling $15 million annually. And it says here she's also the co-founder of Quantum Tech Solutions, which was acquired by IBM last year for $2.3 billion. Dad's Scotch glass slipped from his fingers and shattered on the terrace stones. $2.3 billion, Judge Chen whispered. My personal stake was about $800 million, I said quietly. But that's not really the point. Bill was still reading from his phone, his voice filled with awe. Dr. Thompson's quantum entanglement protocol has applications in secure communications, medical diagnostics, financial cryptography, and climate modeling. The Nobel Committee called it the most significant advance in quantum physics since the discovery of quantum mechanics itself. $800 million, Dad repeated numbly. You're worth $800 million. The money isn't what matters, Dad. It's the research. We're on the verge of quantum computers that could solve climate change, cure genetic diseases, revolutionize how we understand the universe itself. Dr. Torres was shaking his head in disbelief. David, do you understand what your daughter has accomplished? The Nobel Prize in Physics it's the highest honor in science. Einstein, Bohr, Heisenberg. Your daughter is in that category now. I don't understand, Dad said weakly. You drive an old car. You dress like a graduate student. You live so modestly. Because the work is what matters, not the lifestyle. I drive a reliable car because I don't need to impress anyone. I dress comfortably because I spend my days in laboratories, not boardrooms. I live simply because material possessions don't bring the satisfaction that comes from unlocking the secrets of quantum mechanics. Bill was still scrolling through articles on his phone. Listen to this. Dr. Thompson's breakthrough could lead to quantum computers capable of performing calculations that would take classical computers longer than the age of the universe to complete. Victoria, you've literally changed the future of computing. And medicine, I added. Quantum sensors based on our entanglement protocol can detect cancer cells at the molecular level years before current technology. We're working with hospitals to implement quantum-enhanced MRI machines that could save millions of lives. Judge Chen set down his drink with trembling hands. David, your daughter hasn't wasted her potential. She's used it to benefit all of humanity. Dad looked around at his friends' faces, seeing the awe and respect they now showed toward me, the same daughter he'd been humiliating moments before. But why didn't you tell me? Why let me think you were struggling, that your career was meaningless? Because you decided 20 years ago that success could only be measured in construction contracts and profit margins, I said gently. You never asked about my research, never wanted to understand what I was working on. You just assumed that because it wasn't business, it wasn't valuable. The Nobel Prize comes with a cash award of over $1 million, Dr. Torres added quietly. But Victoria, what you've accomplished goes so far beyond money. You've advanced human knowledge in ways that will impact generations. A crowd was beginning to gather as word spread across the terrace that a Nobel laureate was present. Mrs. Henderson approached with several other tournament organizers, their faces filled with excitement and bewilderment. Dr. Thompson, she said breathlessly, we had no idea. The foundation that's been supporting our scholarship program anonymously for 5 years. That's you, isn't it? I nodded. The Thompson Chin Quantum Education Foundation. We fund science education programs in underserved communities. $5 million over 5 years. Mrs. Henderson continued. You've sent 43 students to college in STEM fields. Dad's face was pale. You've been donating millions to charity all this time. Education is the foundation of scientific progress, I explained. Every young person we help might be the one who makes the next breakthrough. Quantum mechanics started with curious students asking impossible questions. Bill Morrison was now reading from what appeared to be a Forbes article. Dr. Victoria Thompson, ranked among the top 50 most influential scientists alive today. Her quantum computing company was acquired by IBM for. He paused, looking up at me. It says here the acquisition was actually $2.8 billion, not $2.3 billion. The final number was higher than initial reports. I confirmed. But I retained the intellectual property rights for medical applications. Those patents are being licensed to pharmaceutical companies for quantum drug discovery. Quantum drug discovery? Dr. Torres leaned forward with professional interest. Quantum computers can model molecular interactions with perfect accuracy, dramatically accelerating the development of new medications. What currently takes 10 to 15 years of research and testing could be reduced to months. We're working on quantum-designed treatments for Alzheimer's, cancer, genetic disorders, diseases that have puzzled medicine for generations. Judge Chen shook his head slowly. David, your daughter isn't just successful. She's working to solve the biggest challenges facing humanity. The modesty, Dad said suddenly, his voice barely audible. All these years, you let me criticize you, let me call you a failure, and you never once defended yourself. What would have been the point? I asked. You'd already decided that my work was worthless because it wasn't immediately profitable. Telling you about awards or recognition wouldn't have changed your mind about the value of basic research. But the Nobel Prize is recognition from my peers that the work matters. But the real reward is knowing that quantum entanglement protocols might help cure diseases, that quantum computers might solve climate change, that the curiosity-driven research you called fairy tales might actually save the world. Mrs. Henderson was practically vibrating with excitement. Dr. Thompson, would you consider speaking at tonight's ceremony? The students receiving scholarships would be incredibly inspired to meet a Nobel laureate. I'd be honored, I replied, though I hope we can focus on the students' achievements rather than mine. Are you kidding? Bill Morrison laughed. Victoria, you're going to be the most famous person ever to attend one of our charity tournaments. The Nobel Prize in Physics, do you understand how extraordinary that is? Dad finally found his voice again. Victoria, I owe you an apology. The biggest apology of my life. Dad, you don't? Yes, I do. He stepped closer, his eyes filled with tears. For 20 years, I've been telling anyone who would listen that my daughter was a disappointment. I measured your worth by my standards instead of trying to understand what you were actually accomplishing. You wanted me to be successful, I said softly. You just had a different definition of success. No, that's not an excuse. I should have learned about your work. I should have tried to understand why someone as brilliant as you would dedicate their life to something I didn't comprehend. He looked around at his friends, all of whom were still staring at me with newfound respect. Instead, I embarrassed myself by publicly belittling a Nobel laureate because I was too proud to admit I didn't understand quantum physics. Dr. Torres clapped Dad on the shoulder. David, most of us don't understand quantum physics either, but we can recognize extraordinary achievement when we see it. The irony, Judge Chin added, is that Victoria's work will probably have more lasting impact than anything any of us has ever built. Buildings can be torn down, I agreed, but scientific discoveries become part of humanity's permanent knowledge. The quantum mechanics I study today will still be true 1,000 years from now. A young reporter from the local newspaper had somehow materialized at the edge of our group. Dr. Thompson? I'm Sarah Kim from the Tribune. Could I possibly get a quote about your Nobel Prize? The community had no idea we had such a distinguished scientist among us. The community has many distinguished people, I replied diplomatically. Scientists, teachers, doctors, business leaders. We all contribute in different ways. But the Nobel Prize, she pressed. How does it feel to be recognized at the highest level of scientific achievement? I glanced at Dad, who was listening intently. It feels like validation that curiosity-driven research matters. That asking questions about the fundamental nature of reality isn't a waste of time. It's one of the most important things humans can do. And your plans for the prize money? The same as always. It goes to education programs and research funding. The next generation of scientists will accomplish far more than my generation ever could. As the reporter walked away, Bill Morrison shook his head in amazement. Victoria, in all my years in banking, I've never met anyone who treats money the way you do. $800 million, and you live like a graduate student. Money is a tool, I explained. It can fund research, support education, solve problems. But accumulating it for its own sake doesn't interest me. There are too many fascinating questions to explore. Dad was quiet for a long moment, processing everything he'd learned. Finally, he spoke. Victoria, would you be willing to have dinner with me tomorrow? Just the two of us? I'd like to learn about your work. Really learn about it. I'd like that, Dad. And maybe you could explain quantum entanglement to an old construction worker who's just realized he doesn't know anything about his own daughter's life. I smiled, feeling a warmth I hadn't experienced around Dad in decades. Quantum entanglement is actually a beautiful metaphor for family relationships. Two particles can become connected in such a way that what happens to one instantly affects the other, no matter how far apart they are. Like parents and children? He asked hopefully. exactly like parents and children. As the sun set over the golf course, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, I found myself surrounded by people who suddenly saw me very differently than they had an hour before. But the person whose perception mattered most, my father, was looking at me with something I'd never seen in his eyes before: pride. Dr. Thompson, Mrs. Henderson approached with a small group of high school students. These are some of our scholarship recipients. They're studying physics and engineering because of programs your foundation has supported. A young woman named Maria stepped forward shyly. Dr. Thompson, I just wanted to say thank you. Your scholarship is letting me study astrophysics at MIT. I want to search for exoplanets that might have life. That's extraordinary, Maria. The universe is full of mysteries waiting for curious minds like yours to solve them. A young man named David, the same name as my father, spoke up next. Dr. Thompson, I'm studying quantum computing because I read about your research. I want to help build quantum computers that can model climate systems. Climate modeling is one of the most important applications of quantum computing, I replied. You could help save the planet. As the students shared their dreams and aspirations, I noticed Dad listening intently to every word. These young people represented the future of science, the next generation of researchers who would push the boundaries of human knowledge even further. Victoria, Dad said quietly, as the students moved on, I'm beginning to understand something. Your work isn't just about winning prizes or making money. It's about inspiring young people to dream bigger than I ever thought possible. That's exactly right, Dad. Every breakthrough opens doors for others. Every discovery asks new questions. Every young scientist we support might be the one who solves problems we can't even imagine yet. The dinner ceremony that evening was unlike any charity event I'd ever attended. Word had spread about the Nobel laureate in attendance, and the local media had arrived in force. But what struck me most was the change in how people interacted with me, and how Dad introduced me. This is my daughter, Dr. Victoria Thompson, he said proudly to everyone we met. She just won the Nobel Prize in Physics for her work in quantum computing. She's going to help cure cancer and solve climate change. It was an oversimplification, but it was also the first time in 20 years that my father had spoken about my career with pride instead of disappointment. During my speech to the scholarship recipients, I looked out at the audience and saw Dad in the front row, beaming with genuine pride. For the first time since I was a child, I felt like he truly saw me, not as a disappointment or a failure to meet his expectations, but as someone who had found their own path to making a meaningful contribution to the world. The most important thing I can tell you, I concluded my remarks, is that success isn't about meeting other people's definitions of achievement. It's about finding work that feeds your curiosity, challenges your intellect, and contributes something valuable to humanity. Whether you become a scientist, an artist, a teacher, or an entrepreneur, follow your passion, ask impossible questions, and never let anyone convince you that knowledge for its own sake is worthless. The standing ovation that followed wasn't just for the Nobel Prize winner. It was for the idea that extraordinary achievement can come from anywhere, from anyone willing to pursue their deepest curiosity about how the world works. As Dad and I walked to our cars after the ceremony, he stopped and turned to me. Victoria, I need you to know something. I spent 20 years being wrong about you, about your work, about what really matters in life. But I've never been more proud to be your father than I am right now. Thank you, Dad. That means everything to me. Can I ask you one more question? Of course. Those particles you study, quantum entanglement, can the connection between them be repaired if it's been damaged? I smiled, understanding the deeper meaning of his question. With the right conditions and enough time, quantum systems can be restored to their original entangled state. The connection never really disappears. Sometimes it just needs the right environment to become strong again. I'd like to work on creating the right environment, he said softly. I'd like that too, Dad. As I drove home that night, I reflected on the strange turns life can take. 24 hours ago, I was just David Thompson's disappointing daughter who'd wasted her potential on theoretical physics. Tonight, I was a Nobel laureate whose work might help solve humanity's greatest challenges. But the most important change wasn't in how the world saw me. It was in how my father finally understood that there are many different ways to build something meaningful, many different kinds of legacy worth leaving behind. Sometimes the smallest particles reveal the biggest truths about how the universe works. And sometimes a conversation at a golf tournament can quantum entangle a father and daughter who thought their connection had been lost forever.